That night, Tadanori called Edward to recommend Moroha for an S-rank designation. However, Edward said he was disappointed in Moroha because he had already tested him and didn't think he was ready to be nominated for the S-rank yet. It turned out the person who had attacked Moroha was actually Angela, and her intention was to test him. Tadanori pointed out that Moroha had defeated the Dreadnought even though there were 3 people involved. Edward suspected the other 2 must have been just as powerful. The next day, when Moroha returned to his room, he was surprised to find Maya there. She told him that starting that day, they would be roommates. Maya asked him to think of her as a soft body pillow. Moroha was clearly shocked and asked her to go back to the principal's office, but Maya said that the decision had already been approved by Mari. Moroha found it hard to believe, but that night, they ended up sharing the same bed. Moroha felt uneasy, wondering if that kind of situation was even okay. The next morning at breakfast, Tadanori told Shizuno that she had been chosen to work overseas because the headquarters in England didn't have enough dark mages. Tadanori believed they would be glad to have a student who had defeated a metaphysical. Shizuno immediately rejected the idea, but Tadanori said that the decision had already been made by her family. That morning, Shizuno walked to school looking downcast. Moroha, along with Satsuki and Maya, greeted her. Satsuki, annoyed, told Shizuno that Maya had become Moroha's roommate. Maya hoped Shizuno could accept her, and she grabbed onto Moroha's arm. Shizuno asked Moroha to explain what was going on, but he said he didn't understand anything either. During lunch break, Moroha and his friends were eating together when Satsuki commented that their lunches were not fancy enough. She showed off the sandwiches she made. Maya responded by saying that onigiri were also delicious. At that moment, Shizuno was eating curry bread and offered some to Moroha by feeding it to him, which annoyed Satsuki. Satsuki questioned why Moroha could do something like that in front of his little sister and called him unfaithful. She reminded everyone that in their past life, Moroha used to feed her every day and was always kind to her. Moroha then fed Satsuki too, and she didn't even mind if he kissed her while her eyes were closed. That afternoon, Shizuno parted ways with Moroha and the others and quietly watched them as they joked around together. While taking a bath later that evening, Shizuno admitted to herself that she was jealous of Satsuki for being able to call Moroha big brother and for being spoiled by him. Shizuno, on the other hand, was not treated the same way. She wondered why things always turned out that way for her and eventually broke down in tears. The next day at school, Satsuki told Moroha that she had already talked with the principal about becoming his roommate, arguing that she was his little sister in their past life. But the principal had rejected the request. She asked Moroha not to think of Maya as his sister. Satsuki also found it strange that Shizuno didn't show up at school and hadn't contacted any of them. Then Maya suddenly walked into the classroom. That same day, Edward visited Shizuno's home. He was surprised that she was willing to go abroad. Tadanori told him that Shizuno wouldn't turn down an offer from Edward. Not long after, the Urashibara family's butler informed Tadanori that head Shimon was on the phone and wanted to speak with Shizuno. Tadanori told her to take the call. To her surprise, the caller turned out to be Moroha, who asked her what was going on. Shizuno claimed she had the flu, but Moroha could tell she was lying. He warned her that if she didn't tell him the truth, he would come over. Shizuno finally admitted that she was going to study in England. Moroha was shocked by how sudden that decision was. He told her he would support her if it was truly what she wanted, but he also knew it wasn't. Moroha asked her to ignore what Tadanori had said. At that moment, Shizuno remembered how in her past life she had been subjected to cruelty. Because of her ties to the Urashibara family, she felt like she had no choice but to obey. Upon hearing that, Moroha punched the phone and declared that no chains could ever bind human freedom. Hearing his words, Shizuno was moved. Even without her memories, Moroha was saying the exact same thing Shusora had once said in their past life. Shizuno told Moroha not to worry about her, assuring him that she would be just fine. She quickly ended the call and tried to hold back her tears. Meanwhile, Edward mentioned that he planned to appoint Shizuno as the head of the department after she graduated. Hearing this, Tadanori felt genuinely happy. Edward admitted he believed Tadanori would feel lonely without Shizuno, but Tadanori asked him not to worry about it. Not long after, Butler informed Tadanori that Moroha had arrived at their house, but Tadanori told him to just send the boy away. Suddenly, Moroha broke into Shizuno's house and Shizuno was shocked to see him there. Moroha said he would break in again if she ever lied to him. Tadanori was stunned that Moroha would damage property and force his way in. Moroha admitted that he had lost control. Edward asked what he intended to do, and Moroha said he came to warn Edward, someone who couldn't see what was right in front of him, and to call him out. Shizuno tried to stop Moroha from saying any more, but he went ahead and confessed that he was the one who defeated the metaphysical on his own. Tadanori asked if that meant Moroha was claiming to be rank S. Shizuno reminded everyone that being rank S came at the cost of personal freedom. Moroha said he understood that, and he was ready to face the consequences. Shizuno was confused as to why Moroha would go that far for her. Moroha replied that he did it because of her, that she was the reason he could do any of it. Shizuno broke down in tears, overwhelmed with emotion. She and Moroha had already died once before, yet here they were, reunited. Compared to that, studying abroad was no big deal. Moroha said that because he had no memories of their past life together, Shizuno now meant everything to him, and he could not bear to be separated from her. He asked Shizuno to speak honestly about how she truly felt. Crying, Shizuno said that she wanted to be with Moroha in their past life, in this life, and in the life to come. Moroha asked her to come to him, and Shizuno ran into his arms. In that moment, she felt as if the chains that had bound her for so long were finally broken. She wept uncontrollably in his embrace. Tadanori suspected that Moroha was going to take Shizuno away. Moroha cheekily stuck out his tongue at Tadanori before leaping out the window, carrying Shizuno in his arms. Meanwhile, Maya and Satsuki had already arrived with a car to pick them up. They all quickly made their getaway. Shizuno felt so happy to finally break free from everything that had held her down. Tadanori pleaded with Edward to bring Shizuno back, but Edward said he had no interest in getting involved in internal affairs. Still, Tadanori, as the head of the Japan branch, begged him to reconsider. As the car driven by Maya sped down the road, one of the tires was suddenly punctured by a knife thrown straight at it. The vehicle lost control instantly. Moroha used his magic to summon chains that wrapped around the car, stopping it from going off the road. The car spun around before coming to a full stop, held in place by the chains. It turned out that Angela was the one who had thrown the knife. Moroha quickly recognized her as the one who had attacked him before. Edward showed up and demanded that Moroha return Shizuno to him, but Moroha refused. Edward argued that if Moroha had truly defeated the metaphysical on his own, then there would be no reason for Shizuno to study abroad. Moroha challenged Edward, saying he would prove it to him by defeating him in a fight. Edward gladly accepted the duel. Satsuki immediately activated her planaria, followed by Shizuno and Moroha. Moroha summoned his weapon named Sarakia. Edward admired the sword but confidently claimed that his own weapon would leave Moroha in pieces. Edward drew his massive sword and immediately launched an attack at Moroha. Moroha met his strike head-on and the two clashed in a fierce sword fight. Moroha quickly cast his Taihaku technique, but it still wasn't strong enough to defeat Edward. Seizing the opportunity, Edward pierced Moroha with his blade. Meanwhile, Angela charged at Satsuki and Shizuno. With just a single strike, she managed to knock Satsuki down. However, Satsuki refused to give up and quickly got back on her feet. As Angela prepared to deliver a finishing blow, Shizuno cast Freezing Shade, freezing the surrounding area in order to stop Angela's attack. At the same time, Maya ran up the hill. Moroha was still locked in battle with Edward. He attempted to use his Freeze Blade spell, but Edward effortlessly blocked it. Moroha was puzzled, trying to figure out what trick Edward had used. Edward explained that he had concentrated all the prana in his body into a single point known as Kinu. Then, using a technique called Kaugi, he shortened the time it took to move, allowing him to become untouchable for a few seconds, a state called Gyokuto. These two variations together were known as Kanatsu. Moroha thought that even if Edward could block his third stage attacks, using the fire element version of Gyokuto might be able to burn through. He began casting the spell, but Edward responded immediately with Hagen Kaugi, sending Moroha flying deep into the forest. Edward advised him to stop fighting, suggesting it was time to walk away from the battle. While recovering in the forest, Moroha set up a Field of Dreams, a spell that helped heal injuries, similar to the one used at school. Maya encouraged him, saying he could now fight without worrying about protecting anyone else. Grateful, Moroha thanked her, now ready to go all out. Moroha began casting again. Edward moved in to attack, but it turned out to be a trap, a dark magic technique. Moroha launched his Yin-Yang Kurakara strike, shattering Edward's sword in an instant. However, Edward revealed he had a second pendant. Activating his Jinrei Augustin, his body was covered in armor and a shield, making him look like a fully armored warrior. Meanwhile, Angela was still fighting Satsuki and Shizuno. Her attack came to a halt when she heard a loud explosion coming from the hill. Confused, she paused to understand what was going on. Back in the battle, Moroha kept attacking Edward using both fire and freeze blade spells, but none of them could penetrate the armor. Edward had become nearly invincible, blocking all of Moroha's sword swings with ease. Moroha attacked from every direction, but it still wasn't enough to bring him down. Eventually, Moroha managed to crack the helmet protecting Edward's head. Edward complimented him, impressed by his strength. Edward then chased after Moroha, trying to land a decisive hit. Moroha dodged, trying to think of a strategy to finally defeat him. That's when memories of his past life with Shizuno came rushing back, remembering how he had once saved her from slavery and how she had chosen to stay by his side even when the whole world turned against them. Shizuno, it turned out, had been his wife in the previous life. With that memory, Moroha recalled how to use the Decrete's Weight technique. He leaped into the air and began chanting the 8th stage of dark magic. Edward was thrilled, looking forward to the moment of glory. Angela was shocked to learn that someone besides the Russian prince could wield such a spell. Shizuno, on the other hand, was confident the battle wasn't over. Moroha was casting a forbidden incantation. As Moroha completed the spell, a white dragon appeared and began to freeze the area around them. Edward called Moroha a captured monster and claimed that he must be the 7th S-rank comrade. For the first time, Angela genuinely worried about Edward's safety. That night, Moroha and his friends were gathered at Mary's house. Satsuki was curious why Moroha hadn't finished off Edward during the fight. Moroha admitted that his only goal had been to freeze Edward in place so he couldn't move, even though Maya had hoped he would avenge her car from earlier that afternoon. Moroha explained that he had attacked Edward countless times and all he managed was to dent his armor a little, and he still had no idea how to actually beat him. Mary asked how Satsuki's injuries were and Maya said she was nearly done healing her. Moroha then asked if Shizuno was alright and Shizuno said that Satsuki had protected her. Moroha felt grateful for how things had turned out. Not long after, the doorbell at Mary's house rang. It turned out Edward had come to visit. Moroha and Shizuno immediately went to meet him. Edward explained that he wasn't going to do anything rash since he and Moroha were both knights. He acknowledged Moroha's victory and shared that he had cancelled Shizuno's transfer. Edward said he came only to ask one thing. Why didn't Moroha dodge his punch back at the cafe? Moroha answered that he knew Edward never intended to actually kill him. Curious, Edward asked how Moroha could be so sure. Moroha explained that he could see through his opponent's intentions. Edward laughed and said Moroha was full of surprises. As the head of the British branch, Edward announced that he would be nominating Moroha for S-rank status. That night, Shizuno shared that Tadanori had told her Moroha would eventually be sent to the headquarters of the White Knight organization. Moroha responded that he actually preferred that over being far away from her. Then Moroha asked whether Shizuno was truly a netherworld sorceress. Shizuno admitted that she wasn't sure. She said she wasn't pretending, she simply couldn't express it the same way Satsuki could. What she really wanted was for Moroha to remember her. In their past life, Moroha had set Shizuno free because to him, no chain in that world could bind a person's freedom. Shizuno said that because Moroha was the one who freed her, he now had a responsibility to stay with her. She hoped he wouldn't let go, not until death and even beyond into the next life. Shizuno hugged Moroha and told him that he was the one who had bound her, both in their past life and in the present. To her, that bond was Moroha's way of making things right. Almost a month after the Edward incident, Akan Academy was finally entering summer vacation. Jin announced that the summer camp would be held on a small island in Yamaguchi Prefecture. Satsuki had no idea what they were supposed to do during the camp. Suddenly, one of the students, Takiko, who served as vice captain, lightly touched Moroha's back and asked him to go shopping for swimsuits with her after school. She insisted on picking out a snub boomerang-style swimsuit for him, which completely caught him off guard. Jin encouraged everyone to treat the summer camp like a fun party, but also reminded them not to do anything inappropriate. That day, Satsuki went to a shopping mall to look for an eye-catching swimsuit, hoping to outshine both Shizuno and Takiko in getting Moroha's attention. Meanwhile, Tadanori had arranged for a professional designer and stylist to help Shizuno choose a perfect and flattering swimsuit since she would be spending time with Moroha at the beach. However, Tadanori crossed the line by pushing Shizuno to act provocatively around Moroha, leaving her feeling resigned to going along with it. Elsewhere, Moroha was stopped by a swimwear shop, where he ran into his upperclassman, Haruka, who was trying on swimsuits. Moroha commented that the bikini Haruka had picked really suited her. Haruka blushed and called him cheeky. She wasn't sure if a girl with a smaller figure like hers could pull off a bikini, but Moroha reassured her that she could. He thought she looked cute. Embarrassed, Haruka called him a liar and said people often mistook her for a boy when she was younger. She quickly turned away and hid in the changing room. The day of the summer camp finally arrived. The students gathered together as Mary began chanting a spell to open a temporary transport gate. This magic was valuable as it could only be used once per day. Shortly after, everyone was transported to the beach. Satsuki was so excited that she immediately jumped into the ocean. But suddenly, she let out a scream that startled both Moroha and Shizuno. It turned out the waves had pulled at her swimsuit. She called out to Moroha for help. A short while later, Maya showed up and teased them for having fun without her. Haruka also arrived wearing a white shirt over her outfit. Moroha commented that it seemed like buying a new swimsuit was pointless if she was going to keep it covered. Haruka blushed in response. Satsuki, curious, asked how Moroha knew about the new swimsuit. Instead of answering, he told Satsuki to cover up her chest, which was a little exposed. Shizuno urged him to explain himself. Haruka was about to speak up when Uesugi playfully touched her back, causing her to accidentally lift her shirt and reveal the bikini underneath. Uesugi remarked that Haruka had made an effort for someone special, so that person should at least get to see it. Moroha said the bikini looked great on her. Suddenly, Tokiko grabbed Moreau's back, surprising him once again. Soon after, Sophia appeared wearing a bold and fashionable bikini that turned heads. Uesuke asked why Tokiko wasn't wearing a swimsuit. Frustrated, Tokiko explained that Jin had forbidden her from wearing anything too revealing, even though she really wanted Moroha to notice her. Upset, she again squeezed Moroha's back and called Captain Jin stubborn, clueless, and antisocial, claiming he was getting in the way of her feelings for Moroha. Just then, Jin showed up and pressed down on Tokiko's head in a light reprimand. She quickly tried to walk back what she had said. Jin then called everyone together to begin their training. He told them to choose a personal challenge and promised that they would need to complete it by the final day of camp. The students seemed eager to get started. Jin told them all to meet at the lodge by 6 p.m. Suddenly, Satsuki declared that she had already decided on her challenge. She wanted to race Haruka and was confident she would win. Haruka was puzzled and asked why Satsuki didn't choose a different challenge. Satsuki teased her, wondering if Haruka was intimidated by her charm, especially as she glanced at Haruka's chest, which was noticeably smaller than hers. Haruka started to feel a bit insecure. Satsuki noticed and said that it seemed like she would not be able to beat Haruka right away. She clarified that she did not mean to sound arrogant. Eventually, Haruka had no choice but to accept Satsuki's challenge. Once both of them were ready, Moroha gave the signal for the race to begin. They both activated their plana and started running. Haruka dashed forward at an impressive speed and won the race. Satsuki reached the finish line shortly after, visibly exhausted. Not satisfied with the outcome, she asked for a rematch. She pushed herself to the limit, but Haruka still managed to pass her effortlessly. It became clear that Satsuki was no match for Haruka when it came to speed. Uesuke commented that both of them looked very fired up. Shizuno remarked that Satsuki did not know her limits, while Maya was convinced Satsuki had no chance of beating Haruka and was simply pushing herself too hard. Suddenly, Moroha's phone rang. It was Edward calling him. He addressed Moroha as Jack, saying he gave him that nickname because Moroha was full of surprises like a jackpot. Edward pointed out how lucky Moroha was while Edward was stuck in a meeting. Moroha was out enjoying a vacation with a bunch of girls. Moroha was surprised Edward knew about the trip, and Edward explained that he had talked with Mari about the Six Heads meeting that involved Moroha. Edward asked if Moroha was curious about what was discussed, but Moroha was not interested and quickly hung up the call. Edward immediately called again. Afterward, Moroha returned to his friends. Shizuno asked who had just called, and Moroha explained that Edward wanted to nominate him for Shizuno's rank, but apparently the Lightning Emperor from Russia strongly opposed the idea. Maya mentioned that this could be dangerous. Mari had once told her the Lightning Emperor was not someone to take lightly. Shizuno realized that she was the one who had unintentionally revealed Moroha's strength to Edward. However, Moroha reassured her that it was not her fault. Meanwhile, Satsuki looked completely worn out after several rounds of racing with Haruka. Haruka asked if she was okay and Satsuki responded that she was fine.